son of the north. The fjord lay still under a sky heavy with clouds, its waters dark as iron, reflecting the jagged cliffs that cradled the village of Skjoldvik. Autumn had settled in, the air sharp with the scent of pine and salt, the days shrinking like a tide pulling back from the shore. Smoke rose from the longhouses, their turf roofs sagging under the weight of recent rains, blending into the hills as if the earth itself had birthed them. This was a place of endurance, where the sea gave life and demanded it in return, where every soul knew the cost of survival. Hakon Olafsson stood at the edge of the village, where the land met the sea, his hands gripping the haft of an axe. The blade was nicked but sharp, its edge catching the faint light as he drove it into a log, splitting it with a crack that echoed across the shore. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the chill, his breath fogging as he worked. At 26, Hakon was broad-shouldered, his arms corded from years of rowing and wielding tools, but his face held a quiet intensity, a man who thought more than he spoke. His dark hair was tied back, streaked with early gray, a mark of the burdens he carried. The pile of firewood grew slowly, each swing of the axe a release for the restlessness that gnawed at him. The fishing had been poor this season, the nets coming up light, and the barley harvest barely enough to fill the village's stores. Winter loomed like a wolf at the door, and Hakon felt its teeth at his neck. He paused, wiping his brow, and looked out at the fjord. A single boat bobbed in the distance, its sail patched and faded, old Thrain, stubborn as ever, chasing fish that seemed to have fled. Hakon envied the old man's solitude, if only for a moment. Solitude was a luxury he couldn't afford. Hakon. The voice was clear, carrying over the wind. He turned to see Freya, his wife, standing at the door of their longhouse, her hands on her hips. Her auburn hair was braided tightly, her woolen dress stained with soot from the hearth. She was slight but strong, her eyes sharp with a mix of worry and resolve. "You'll split every tree in the valley at this rate. Come eat. The children are hungry, and I need you to fix the loom before dark." Hakon set the axe against a stump, his hands aching. "The loom again? I fixed it last week." "And it broke again," she said, her tone dry but warm. "Unless you want us wearing rags this winter, you'll see to it." He grunted, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Freya had a way of cutting through his moods, her pragmatism a tether when his thoughts drifted too far. He followed her toward the longhouse, the smell of barley porridge and smoked fish greeting him as he ducked through the door. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of hearthfire and damp wool. The longhouse was modest, its walls lined with benches and woven hangings, the floor packed earth-strewn with rushes. At the center, a fire crackled, casting shadows on the faces of their children, Bjorn, 7, whittling a stick with a small knife, his brow furrowed in concentration, and Liv, 4, playing with a rag doll, her laughter soft but bright. "Father." Liv scrambled to her feet, toddling toward him. Hakon scooped her up, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Her hair, pale as moonlight, tickled his face, and for a moment, the weight in his chest eased. "Careful, little one," he said, setting her down. "You'll knock me into the fire." Bjorn looked up, his eyes, the same gray as Hakon's, sharp with curiosity. "Did you see Thrain's boat? He says the fish are gone because the sea gods are angry." Hakon sat on a bench, pulling Liv onto his knee. "Thrain says a lot of things. The fish are just hiding, that's all. They'll come back." Bjorn's face darkened, unconvinced. "What if they don't?" Freya set a bowl of porridge before Hakon, her hand brushing his shoulder. "Then we'll find something else to eat," she said firmly. Now put that knife away before you carve your fingers off. Hakon ate in silence, the porridge plain but warm. Bjorn's question lingered, a reminder of the truth they all felt but rarely spoke. Skjoldvik was a small village, 15 families bound by blood and necessity, but the land was unforgiving, and the sea even more so. Last winter had been harsh, claiming 2 elders and a child to fever, and the stores were already low. Hakon's father, Olaf, had been Jarl then, a steady hand guiding the village through lean years. But Olaf was gone, taken by a Saxon arrow 3 summers ago on a raid across the sea. Now the Jarl was Kettle Redbeard, a man of ambition and iron, whose eyes gleamed with dreams of wealth and glory. Hakon respected him, but trust was another matter. As he ate, Hakon's gaze drifted to the corner of the Longhouse, where his father's shield hung, its paint chipped, the wood scarred from battle. Olaf had been a man of few words, but his presence had filled the village like the fjord itself, deep, unyielding. Hakon had tried to fill that space, to be the man his father was, but the weight of it pressed harder each day. He was no jarl, only a fisherman, a farmer, a father. Yet Kettle had summoned the men to the great hall tonight, and the whispers were clear: a raid was coming, west to the lands of the Franks, where monasteries held silver and grain. Hakon had no hunger for battle, but the promise of food, of security for Freya and the children, was a lure he couldn't ignore. Freya sat across from him, mending a cloak, her needle moving with practiced ease. She didn't look at him, but he knew she sensed his thoughts. "The hall meeting," she said, her voice low so the children wouldn't hear. "It's about a raid, isn't it?" Hakon nodded, scraping the last of the porridge from the bowl. "Kettle's talking of sailing west. Soon, before the storms close the sea." Her needle paused, just for a moment. "And you? What are you talking of?" He leaned back, Liv's weight warm against his chest. "I don't know. We need the silver. The children need more than porridge and patched cloaks. But the sea's been cruel, and the Franks are no fools. They've learned to guard their shores." Freya's eyes met his, steady but shadowed. "Your father went on raids. He came back with silver, but he also came back with wounds. And then he didn't come back at all." Hakon felt the words like a blow, though her voice was soft. Olaf's death had broken something in them both. Freya, who had loved him like a father, Hakon, who had lost his guide. He remembered the day the ship returned without him, the crew's faces grim, the village's grief a heavy fog. Bjorn had been too young to understand, but he'd clung to Hakon's leg, silent and wide-eyed. Freya had wept only once, in the dark, when she thought Hakon couldn't hear. "I'm not my father," he said finally. "I don't seek fame or a seat in Valhalla. But if I don't go, someone else will. And Kettle won't forget those who stay behind." Freya set the cloak down, her hands folding in her lap. "Kettle doesn't sleep under this roof. You do." The words hung between them, heavy as the clouds outside. Hakon wanted to answer, to promise he'd stay, but the truth stopped him. The village needed men, and he was one of them. To refuse was to risk shame, not just for himself but for his family. And shame was a cold companion in a place like Skjoldvik. The day passed in a rhythm of work. Hakon repaired the loom, its wooden frame creaking under his hands, while Freya tended the fire and spun wool. Bjorn hauled water from the stream, his small frame straining under the bucket, while Liv trailed after him, chattering about the shapes she saw in the clouds. The village hummed with life, women weaving, men mending nets or sharpening axes, children darting between houses. But beneath it ran a current of unease, a shared knowledge that the coming winter would test them all. As the sun dipped low, painting the fjord gold, Hakon made his way to the Great Hall, a sturdy building of timber and stone at the village's heart. Its roof was carved with serpents, their eyes glinting in the firelight that spilled from the door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mead, smoke, and sweat. Men crowded the benches, their voices a low rumble, while women stood at the edges, their presence a quiet force. Kettle Redbeard sat at the head, his massive frame draped in a bearskin cloak, his red beard braided with silver rings. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the room, missing nothing. "Hakon." Kettle's voice boomed, warm but commanding. "Sit, son of Olaf. We have plans to weave tonight." Hakon took a seat near the back, his hands resting on his knees. The hall was alive with anticipation, men leaning forward, their faces lit by the fire. Kettle raised a horn of mead, his voice filling the space. "The gods have tested us," he began. "The sea hoards its fish, the fields yield little. But the gods reward the bold. Across the sea, the Franks grow rich, their holy houses stuffed with silver and grain. They are soft, and we are not. Who will sail with me to take what we need?" The hall erupted in cheers, horns raised, fists pounding wood. Hakon's hands stayed still, his gaze fixed on the fire. He saw the hunger in Kettle's eyes, a hunger he'd seen before. In his father, in the men who'd sailed with him, in the faces of those who never returned. He thought of Freya, her hands mending cloaks, of Bjorn, whittling with a knife too big for him, of Liv, laughing in the rushes. They were his anchor, but anchors could drown a man. The meeting stretched late, voices clashing like waves, some eager, some cautious, all bound by the same need. Kettle spoke of ships, of routes, of the wealth waiting across the sea. Hakon listened, his thoughts a tangle of duty and doubt. He spoke only once, asking about the Franks' defenses, his voice steady but low. Kettle's answer was confident, but Hakon saw the flicker in his eyes, the uncertainty beneath the bravado. When the meeting ended, the wind had risen, carrying the scent of rain. Hakon stepped into the night, the village dark save for the glow of hearths. The fjord was a shadow, its voice a low roar. He walked home, the weight of the hall's words pressing against him. Freya was waiting, sitting by the fire, her hands idle for once. The children slept, their breaths soft in the quiet. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hakon sat beside her, the fire's warmth doing little to ease the chill in his bones. "He sails in 3 weeks. He wants me on his ship." Freya nodded, her eyes on the flames. "And you? What do you want?" He looked at her, her face lit by the fire, and felt the weight of the sea, the hall, the village, all pulling at him. "I want to keep you safe," he said. "I want Bjorn and Liv to grow strong. But I don't know if staying or going is the way to do it." She reached for his hand, her fingers rough but warm. "Whatever you choose, we carry it together." Hakon held her hand, the fire crackling between them, and wondered if the gods were listening, or if they too were adrift in the dark. Bjorn and Liv curled together on a bench under a woolen blanket, their faces peaceful in a way Hakon envied. He lay still, listening to the rain, the fjord's distant murmur, and the questions that had kept him awake long after the fire died. 3 weeks. That was the time Kettle Redbeard had given to ready the ships, gather men, and prepare for the raid across the sea to the Frankish lands. 3 weeks to decide if Hakon would sail with them, risking his life for silver and grain, or stay behind, facing the Jarl's scorn and the village's lean Winter. The choice felt like a blade balanced on its edge, ready to cut either way. He thought of Freya's hand in his, her words, "We carry it together," and wondered if she truly believed it, or if she was bracing for a burden she'd bear alone. Hakon rose quietly, his movements careful not to wake the others. The floor was cold against his bare feet as he pulled on his tunic and boots, the leather damp from yesterday's work. He added wood to the hearth, coaxing the embers into flame, and stepped outside. The air was raw, the rain pricking his face like needles. Skjoldvik was stirring, smoke rising from other longhouses, figures moving through the mist, women fetching water, men hauling timber toward the shore. The village was alive, but it felt taut, like a bowstring drawn tight. The great hall's meeting had lit a spark, and now the promise of a raid burned in every hearth, mingling hope with fear. He made his way to the shore, where the fjord lapped at the pebbles, its surface pocked by rain. Ketil's ship, Serpent's Fawn, loomed at the dock, its hull sleek and tar-black, the prow carved with a snarling beast. It was a fine vessel, built for speed and strength, but Hakon saw the scars in its timbers, the patches from past voyages. Two smaller boats flanked it, their crews already at work, Einar, Ketil's right-hand man, barking orders, young Sven, barely 16, hauling ropes with eager hands. Hakon's own boat, Wave Cutter, sat farther down, smaller and weathered, built by his father's hands. It was no warship, but it had carried him through storms and lean seasons. He wondered if it would carry him to the Franks, or if it would stay moored, a silent witness to his choice. Hakon. Einar's voice cut through the rain, sharp but friendly. The man was lean, his face scarred from a Saxon blade, his eyes always searching. Come to join the work, or just to stare at the sea? Hakon approached, his boots sinking into the mud. Checking my boat. The rain finds every crack. Einar grinned, tossing a coil of rope to Sven. Aye, and the sea finds every weakness. Ketil wants the ships ready in a fortnight. You sailing with us? The question hung like the rain, heavy and unavoidable. Hakon shrugged, his hand resting on Wavecutter's hull. Haven't decided. There's work enough here. Einar's grin faded, his eyes narrowing. Work here won't fill your stores. The Franks have silver, Hakon. Grain, too. Enough to keep your children fed till spring. Hakon nodded, his jaw tight. And enough spears to guard it. Einar laughed, a short, harsh sound. You sound like old Thrain, muttering about sea gods. We're not boys playing at war. Ketil knows his trade. Hakon didn't answer, his gaze drifting to the fjord. He respected Einar, but the man had no family, no tether beyond the promise of wealth. Hakon envied that freedom, even as it repelled him. He worked in silence, checking Wavecutter's seams, his hands moving with the ease of years. The rain soaked his tunic, but he barely noticed, his thoughts on the hall, on Freya, on the children sleeping by the hearth. By mid-morning, the rain eased, leaving a mist that clung to the cliffs. Hakon returned to the longhouse, his hands numb, his mind no clearer. Freya was at the loom, her fingers deft as she wove wool into cloth, the shuttle's rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Bjorn sat nearby, sharpening a fishing spear, while Liv played with a wooden boat, humming a tune Freya had taught her. The longhouse was warm, the smell of stew mingling with the smoke, but Hakon felt the chill of the shore in his bones. You're dripping, Freya said without looking up. Hang your cloak by the fire. Hakon did as she asked, the wool heavy in his hands. The ships are being readied, he said, sitting on a bench. Einar says they'll sail in a fortnight now. Ketil's pushing hard. Freya's hands paused, the shuttle still. A fortnight, she repeated, her voice low. And you? He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I checked Wave Cutter. She's sound, but she's no warship. If I go, I'd sail with Ketil. Bjorn looked up, his spear forgotten. Are you going, father? To fight the Franks? Hakon met his son's eyes, gray and wide, and felt a pang. Bjorn was too young to understand the cost, but old enough to dream of glory. I haven't decided, he said, his voice firmer than he felt. There's time yet. Liv tugged at his sleeve, her boat in hand. Will you bring me a shell? Like the one Uncle Tor brought? Hakon's throat tightened. Tor, his younger brother, had sailed with Olaf and never returned, his laughter lost to the sea. Liv had been a babe then, but she'd kept the shell Tor gave her, smooth and pearled, a treasure in her small world. If I go, I'll find you a shell, he promised, ruffling her hair. Freya's eyes met his, sharp with unspoken words. She set the shuttle down and stood, her movements brisk. Bjorn, take Liv to fetch water. Stay close to the stream. Bjorn groaned but obeyed, taking Liv's hand. When the children were gone, Freya turned to Hakon, her arms crossed. You're thinking of going, she said, not a question. Hakon stood, the bench creaking. I'm thinking of us. The stores are low, Freya. The fish aren't running. If winter's as hard as last, we'll be eating bark by spring. And if you don't come back? Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. What then? I weave, I fish, I keep the fire. But I can't be you. He stepped closer, his hands reaching for hers, but she kept them folded. I don't want to go, he said. But Ketil's not asking. He's expecting. If I refuse, it's not just me who pays. The village talks. Bjorn hears it. Liv feels it. Freya's lips pressed thin, her gaze dropping to the fire. The village doesn't sleep in this bed. The village doesn't hold our children when they cry. Hakon wanted to argue, to tell her he could stay, but the truth stopped him. Ketil's power was not just in his sword but in his name, his ability to bind men with loyalty or break them with shame. Hakon's father had been Jarl, his voice a shield for Skjoldvik. Now Hakon was just a man, and men did not defy Jarls lightly. The day passed in a blur of work. Hakon mended nets, Freya spun wool, the children ran errands. The village buzzed with preparations, men hauling timber to the shore, women sewing sails, the air thick with the smell of pine tar and salt. Hakon saw Ketil striding among them, his red beard gleaming, his laughter loud but edged with command. The Jarl stopped by Wave Cutter, his hand resting on the prow. Fine boat, Ketil said, his eyes on Hakon. Your father built her, didn't he? Aye, Hakon replied, tying a knot in the net. She's carried me home every time. Ketil nodded, his gaze sharp. Good. We'll need every boat. The Franks won't give their silver easily, but we'll take it. You're with us, aren't you, son of Olaf? Hakon's hands stilled, the rope rough against his palms. I'm thinking on it, he said, meeting Ketil's eyes. Family comes first. Ketil's smile didn't reach his eyes. Family eats when the stores are full. Think hard, Hakon. Your father wouldn't have hesitated. The word stung, and Hakon watched Ketil walk away, his bearskin cloak dark against the mist. He thought of Olaf, his shield scarred, his voice steady in the hall. Olaf had sailed for the village, for honor, but he'd left Freya weeping, Hakon adrift. Was that the man Hakon should be? By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving a sky bruised with clouds. Hakon joined the men at the shore, where Serpent's Fong was being fitted with new oars. Einar led the work, his hands quick, his voice sharp. Sven, the young man, worked beside Hakon, his face flushed with excitement. "My first raid," Sven said, hammering a peg into place. "Father says if I bring back silver, he'll buy a new cow. Maybe two." Hakon glanced at him, the boy's eyes bright with dreams. "Silver's heavy," he said. "So are Frankish spears. Stay close to Einar." Sven laughed, undeterred. "I'm not afraid. The gods are with us." Hakon said nothing, his hammer striking wood. He remembered being Sven's age, eager for the sea, blind to its cost. Now he saw Thor's face, Olaf's shield, the empty places at the hearth. The gods might watch, but they didn't always save. Back at the Longhouse, Freya had prepared a meal of fish stew, the broth thin but warm. Bjorn and Liv ate eagerly, their chatter filling the room. Hakon watched them, his heart heavy. After the children slept, he sat with Freya by the fire, a horn of mead between them. "I spoke with Kettle," he said, his voice low. "He expects me to sail." Freya's fingers tightened on her cup. "And you told him?" "That I'm thinking. That family comes first." She looked at him, her eyes searching. "Does it?" The question cut deeper than Kettle's words. Hakon set the horn down, his hands empty. "Everything I do is for you. For them. But staying might mean hunger. Going might mean worse." Freya leaned forward, her voice fierce but soft. "Then choose, Hakon. Not for Kettle, not for the village. For us." He wanted to promise, to swear he'd find a way, but the fire's light showed only truth. The raid was coming, the sea was calling, and Hakon stood at its edge, a man caught between the hearth and the horizon. Son of the North. The mist hung low over Skjoldvik, curling around the longhouses like a shroud, muffling the sounds of morning. The fjord was a slate-gray mirror, its surface unbroken save for the ripples of a lone gull skimming the water. Hakon Olafsson stood at the threshold of his longhouse, his breath fogging in the chill air, his hands still tingling from the night's restless dreams. The village was waking, the clatter of tools and the murmur of voices rising through the fog, but Hakon felt apart from it, as if the mist had settled in his chest, clouding his path. A week had passed since Kettle Redbeard's second call to prepare the ships, and the raid loomed closer, its shadow stretching across every hearth. The Jarl had set the departure for 10 days hence, weather permitting, and Skjoldvik buzzed with purpose, men shaping oars, women stitching sails, children hauling water for the tar pots. Yet beneath the work ran a current of unease, a shared knowledge that the sea was no friend, and the Franks no easy prey. Hakon felt it most keenly, the weight of his unmade choice pressing harder each day. To sail with Kettle meant silver, perhaps enough to secure his family through winter, but also the risk of never returning, like his father, Olaf, or his brother, Thor. To stay meant safety, but also shame, and the gnawing hunger of a lean season. Inside, Freya was at the hearth, stirring a pot of barley gruel, her movements precise but weary. The firelight caught the lines in her face, etched deeper by sleepless nights. Bjorn sat on a bench, fletching an arrow with a small knife, his fingers clumsy but determined, while Liv played nearby, stacking pebbles into a wobbly tower. The longhouse was warm, the smell of smoke and porridge grounding, but Hakon sensed the tension in Freya's silence, the unspoken question that had grown between them since the last hall meeting. "You're up early," Freya said, not looking at him. "The fire's low. Fetch more wood." Hakon nodded, grateful for the task. He stepped back into the mist, the air damp against his skin, and made for the woodpile behind the longhouse. The axe felt familiar in his hands, its weight a comfort as he split logs, the crack of wood echoing in the quiet. Each swing was a release, a way to quiet the thoughts that circled like wolves, Ketil's sharp gaze, Einar's urging, Freya's plea. He thought of Bjorn's question, "Are you going, father?" and Liv's innocent request for a shell. They deserved more than a father's doubt, but doubt was all he had. As he stacked the wood, a figure emerged from the mist, Thrain, the old fisherman, his back stooped but his eyes sharp. His white beard was braided, damp with dew, and his cloak hung heavy. "Hakon," he rasped, leaning on a gnarled staff. "You're wasting good timber. Winter's coming, not a feast." Hakon set a log on the stump, his breath heavy. "Fire doesn't burn without wood, Thrain. You know that." Thrain chuckled, a dry sound like leaves on stone. "Aye, and ships don't sail without men. Ketil's been asking after you. Says Olaf's son shouldn't be splitting logs when there's silver to be won." Hakon's axe paused mid-swing, his jaw tightening. "Ketil says a lot. I'm no skald to sing his songs." Thrain's eyes narrowed, studying him. "Your father was Jarl. He sailed for Skjoldvik, not for glory. But he knew the cost. Do you?" Hakon drove the axe down, the log splitting clean. "I know my father's shield hangs empty. I know my brother's laughter is gone. That's cost enough." Thrain nodded, his gaze distant. "The sea takes what it will. But so does hunger. I lost 2 sons to raids, Hakon. The third to winter's bite. Choose your poison, but choose." The old man turned, hobbling toward the shore, his staff tapping the mud. Hakon watched him go, Thrain's words sinking like stones. He finished the wood, his arms burning, and carried an armload into the longhouse. Freya was serving gruel, her face unreadable as she handed him a bowl. "Thrain was here," Hakon said, sitting. "Says Ketil's asking for me." Freya's spoon stilled, her eyes meeting his. "And what did you say?" "That I'm not decided." He ate, the gruel tasteless. "He spoke of my father. Of choices." Freya set her bowl down, her voice low. "Your father chose the sea. It didn't choose him back. What's Thrain's point?" Hakon leaned back, Liv climbing onto his knee. "That hunger's as deadly as a sword. That I can't hide from it." Bjorn looked up, his arrow half-fletched. "Are you going to fight, father? Like grandfather?" Hakon felt Freya's gaze, heavy as the mist. "I'm thinking, Bjorn. It's not a game." Bjorn's face fell, and he returned to his work, the knife scraping wood. Liv hummed, oblivious, her fingers tangling in Hakon's beard. Freya stood, clearing the bowls, her silence louder than words. The morning passed in work. Hakon repaired a fishing net, its ropes frayed from use, while Freya wove wool, the looms clack a steady pulse. The village was alive, the shore a hive of activity. Serpent's Fong gleamed with fresh tar, its crew drilling with shields and spears. Einar led them, his voice sharp, while Sven, the young raider, stumbled but grinned, his enthusiasm unbroken. Hakon watched from a distance, his net in hand, and felt the pull of the ship, its promise of wealth, its threat of loss. At midday, Freya joined the women at the sail-making, her hands quick with needle and thread. Hakon took the children to the stream, Bjorn carrying a bucket, Liv skipping stones. The water was cold, clear, rushing over rocks worn smooth. Bjorn was quiet, his eyes on the stream, and Hakon sensed the boy's thoughts. "What's on your mind, son?" Hakon asked, filling the bucket. Bjorn tossed a stone, watching it sink. "Sven says the raid will make us rich. That we'll have meat every day. Is that true?" Hakon set the bucket down, crouching beside him. "Sven's young. He sees silver, not spears. Raids bring wealth, sometimes. But they take, too." Bjorn's face hardened, too old for his years. "Like grandfather. Like Uncle Tor." Hakon nodded, his chest tight. "I like them." Liv splashed nearby, laughing as water soaked her dress. Hakon pulled her back, her giggles easing the moment. He carried the bucket home, Bjorn at his side, and wondered what stories his son would tell one day, and if he'd be there to hear them. Back at the Longhouse, Freya returned, her hands red from stitching. She was quiet, her eyes distant, and Hakon knew the sail-making had been more than work. The women talked, their words weaving fears and hopes as tightly as their thread. He wanted to ask, but the weight of their last talk stopped him. Instead, he sharpened his axe, the whetstones rasped filling the silence. As evening fell, the village gathered for a ritual at the shore, led by a slog, the Valva, a woman whose eyes seemed to see beyond the mist. She was old, her face lined like oak bark, her staff carved with runes. The villagers stood in a circle, the sea lapping at their feet, as a slog burned herbs, their smoke sharp and bitter. She chanted, her voice low, calling on Freyr for bounty, Fjord for safe seas, Thor for strength. A goat was brought, its bleat cut short by Ketil's knife, its blood staining the pebbles. A slog read the entrails, her hands steady, and declared the god's favor, but her eyes lingered on Hakon, as if she saw his doubt. Ketil raised a horn, his voice booming. "The gods are with us. In 10 days, we sail for glory and grain. Who stands with Skjoldvik?" The crowd roared, but Hakon's voice was silent, his hand tight on Liv's shoulder. Freya stood beside him, her face still, and he felt the distance between them, wider than the fjord. As the ritual ended, villagers dispersed, their voices fading into the night. Ketil approached, his red beard glinting in the torchlight. "Hakon," he said, his tone warm but edged. "The Valva sees victory. Your father would have led this raid. Will you follow?" Hakon met his eyes, the weight of the village on him. "I'll give my answer soon, Jarl. My family needs me here." Ketil's smile was thin. "Your family needs a full hearth. Don't wait too long, son of Olaf." As Ketil walked away, Freya touched Hakon's arm, her fingers cold. "Let's go home," she said, her voice soft but firm. The Longhouse was quiet, the children asleep, the fire low. Hakon and Freya sat by the hearth, a shared silence heavy between them. He broke it first, his voice low. "The Valva's words mean nothing if the Franks have steel. But Ketil's right about one thing, our stores won't last." Freya looked at him, her eyes fierce. "And you think silver's worth your life? Bjorn needs a father, not a hero. Liv needs you, not a shell. Hakon leaned forward, his hands clasped. I don't want to be a hero. I want you safe. But Thrain's right, hunger kills as sure as a sword. If I stay, and winter takes us, what then? Freya's voice cracked, rare and raw. Then we face it together. You think I'm afraid of hunger? I'm afraid of waking to an empty bed, of telling our children you're gone. Hakon reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. Her fingers were rough, warm, and he held them like an anchor. I haven't chosen, he said. But I'm trying to choose right. She pulled her hand away, standing. Choose for us, Hakon. Not for Kettle, not for your father's ghost. For us. She turned to the loom, her back to him, and Hakon stared into the fire, the flames offering no answers. The mist outside thickened, the fjord's voice a distant roar, and Hakon felt the sea pulling, its call as relentless as the tide. The dawn broke cold and clear over Skjoldvik, the fjord glinting like polished steel under a sky scrubbed clean by last night's wind. The air carried the bite of autumn, sharp with salt and the promise of frost. Hakon Olafsson woke before the others, his body stiff from the Longhouse's hard bench, his mind heavy with the weight of days closing in. The raid was now 7 days away, and Kettle Redbeard's call echoed in every corner of the village, men hammering pegs into ship hulls, women boiling tar, children running messages between hearths. The rhythm of Skjoldvik had shifted, urgent and unyielding, and Hakon felt caught in its current, unable to find solid ground. He rose quietly, the floor cold beneath his feet, and stirred the hearth's embers into flame. Freya slept on their pallet, her face softened but lined with worry even in rest. Bjorn and Liv were tangled in blankets, their breaths soft in the dim light. Hakon watched them, his chest tight. The Longhouse was his world. Its smoke-stained walls, its woven hangings, the smell of wool and fire, but it felt fragile, as if one wrong choice could shatter it. He pulled on his tunic and boots, the leather stiff with damp, and stepped outside, needing the air to clear his thoughts. The village was already awake, figures moving through the morning chill. Smoke curled from every roof, and the shore hummed with work. Serpent's Fawn, Kettle's warship, stood proud at the dock, its new oars gleaming, while the smaller boats, including Hakon's wave cutter, bobbed nearby, their hulls patched and ready. Men hauled timber, their voices sharp with purpose, while women gathered at the sail loft, their needles flashing. Hakon made his way to the shore, his axe slung over his shoulder, intending to check his boat's rigging. The sea was calm today, but he knew its moods, and a ship unprepared was a death sentence. As he reached Wave Cutter, a voice cut through the noise. Hakon Olafsson, still fussing over that old tub? It was Gunnar, a broad man with a face like weathered oak, his black beard flecked with gray. He stood by Serpent's Fawn, a hammer in hand, his grin sharp. Gunnar was Kettle's cousin, a skilled warrior with a tongue as quick as his blade, and a man who'd never hidden his disdain for Hakon's caution. Hakon kept his eyes on the rigging, his hands steady. She's carried me home every time, Gunnar. Can't say the same for every ship. Gunnar laughed, a bark that drew eyes. Your father's boat, aye. Olaf would have sailed her to Franklin by now, not left her tied like a cow. You're no Jarl's son, Hakon, dithering like an old woman. The word stung, and Hakon's grip tightened on the rope. Gunnar had been on the raid that took Olaf, returning with silver and scars, his tales of valor loud in the hall. He'd always seen Hakon as lesser, a fisherman where Olaf was a leader. Hakon turned, his voice low but firm. I'm thinking of my family, Gunnar. You do well to think of yours. Gunnar's grin didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. My family eats because I sail. Yours might starve because you don't. Ketil's watching, Hakon. So's the village. Hakon held his gaze, the air taut between them. Before he could answer, Einar called from the dock, breaking the moment. Gunnar, enough talk. We need those pegs driven. Gunnar smirked and turned away, his hammer swinging, but his words lingered, sharp as a blade's edge. Hakon worked in silence, checking wavecutter's seams, his hands moving by rote. Gunnar's taunt was no idle jab, it was the village's voice, the pressure of eyes and whispers. To stay behind was to be seen as weak, a man who shirked duty. Yet every knot he tied, every plank he tested, brought Freya's face to mind, her fierce plea, choose for us. He thought of Bjorn's eager questions, Liv's small hand in his, and the empty space where Olaf's laughter once rang. The sea offered silver, but it demanded blood, and Hakon wasn't sure he had more to give. By mid-morning, the sun was high, warming the shore. Hakon joined the men fitting Serpent's Fong with new shields, their rims painted red and black. Einar led the work, his scarred face focused, while Sven, the young raider, hauled shields with a grin. Hakon. Sven called, his voice bright. You joining us? Einar says we'll be rich as kings. Hakon forced a smile, hammering a shield into place. Kings don't fish for cod, Sven. Keep your head down, and maybe you'll see spring. Sven laughed, undeterred, but Einar's eyes met Hakon's, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Einar had sailed with Olaf, had seen the cost of raids. He clapped Hakon's shoulder, his voice low. Ketil's set on you, Hakon. He needs men he trusts. But I know what it is to leave a hearth behind. Hakon nodded, grateful but guarded. Trust doesn't fill graves, Einar. I'll give my answer soon. The work stretched into noon, the shore alive with sweat and song. Women brought bread and dried fish, their voices mingling with the men's. Freya was among them, her auburn braid catching the light as she handed out food. She didn't look at Hakon, her focus on the task, but he felt her presence, steady and sharp. He ate standing, the bread tough but welcome, and watched her move among the others, her laughter rare but warm. She was Skjoldvik's heart, as much as Ketil was its fist, and Hakon wondered if she'd carry the village alone if he sailed. After the meal, Freya approached, her basket empty. The sails are nearly done, she said, her voice neutral. A slog says the gods favor the raid. The women believe her. Hakon wiped his hands, his eyes on the fjord. A slog sees what she wants. The gods don't row the ships. Freya's lips twitched, almost a smile. No, but men do. And you're still deciding. He met her gaze, her eyes searching his. Gunnar called me weak today. Said Olaf would have sailed by now. Freya's face hardened. Gunnar's a fool with a loud mouth. Olaf sailed, and we buried his shield. You're not him. Hakon's chest tightened. No, but I'm his son. The village expects. The village isn't your wife, she cut in, her voice low but fierce. Bjorn and Liv aren't Gunnar's children. You owe us, Hakon, not them. He wanted to answer, to promise he'd stay, but the words caught. Instead, he touched her arm, brief and gentle. I hear you, Freya. I'm trying. She nodded, her eyes softening but not yielding, and turned back to the sail loft. Hakon watched her go, the fjord's glitter mocking his indecision. He returned to the shields, his hammer striking wood, each blow a question unanswered. The afternoon brought a new task, training with spears on the meadow above the village. Ketil led the men, his red beard braided, his axe gleaming at his belt. Hakon joined, his spear familiar but heavy, its ash shaft worn smooth. The men paired off, their thrusts and parries sharp, their breaths fogging in the cool air. Hakon faced Einar, their spears clashing, the rhythm steady but fierce. Einar was quick, his scar twisting with his grin, and Hakon matched him, his body remembering the drills Olaf had taught. As they paused, panting, Gunnar's voice rang out. Hakon's got a spear, but has he the guts to use it? Or will he stay home, weaving with his wife? Laughter rippled through the men, and Hakon's grip tightened. Ketil watched, his eyes narrow, and Hakon knew this was no jest, it was a challenge, public and pointed. He stepped toward Gunnar, his voice calm but cold. "My spear's sharp enough, Gunnar. Care to test it?" The laughter died, the men forming a circle. Gunnar grinned, hefting his spear. "Aye, let's see what Olaf's son is made of." They faced off, spears low, the meadow silent save for the fjord's distant roar. Gunnar lunged first, his thrust fast, but Hakon parried, his feet sure on the grass. They circled, trading blows, the shafts cracking, their breaths harsh. Gunnar was strong, his strikes heavy, but Hakon was steady, his training deep. He saw an opening, feinted, and struck Gunnar's shoulder, the blunt end bruising flesh. Gunnar staggered, his grin gone, and the men murmured. Ketil's voice broke the tension. "Enough. Save your fire for the Franks." He clapped Gunnar's back, but his eyes lingered on Hakon, a mix of approval and calculation. "Good arm, Hakon. We'll need it." Hakon lowered his spear, his pulse racing, Gunnar's glare burning into him. The men dispersed, their voices low, and Hakon felt the weight of their eyes. He'd won the bout, but not the war. Gunnar's grudge was set, and Ketil's expectation heavier. That evening, the village gathered at the great hall for a feast, a send-off for the raid. The hall was warm, its walls hung with shields, the air thick with mead and smoke. Ketil sat at the head, his laughter booming, while Aslog, the Volva, blessed the meal with runes and chants. Hakon sat with Freya, Bjorn, and Liv, the children wide-eyed at the noise. The food was simple, fish, bread, cheese. But plentiful, a rare bounty before the lean days ahead. Ketil raised a horn, his voice filling the hall. "In 7 days, we sail for Frankland. The gods promise victory, and Skjoldvik will feast on silver and grain. To the sea, to glory." The hall roared, horns clashing, but Hakon's hand stayed still, his mead untouched. Freya's knee pressed against his, a silent anchor. Bjorn whispered, "Will you go, father?" and Hakon's answer caught in his throat. After the feast, Hakon walked Freya and the children home, the night crisp, the stars sharp. The longhouse was quiet, the fire low, and Hakon sat with Freya, the children asleep. "Gunnar challenged me today," he said, his voice low. "In front of Ketil. I couldn't back down." Freya's eyes flashed. "Gunnar's baiting you. He wants you to sail, to prove he's stronger. Don't let him pull you to the sea." Hakon leaned forward, his hands clasped. "It's not just Gunnar. Ketil's watching. The village is watching. If I stay, they'll call me coward. Bjorn will hear it." Freya's voice was fierce, her hand gripping his. Let them talk. Bjorn needs you alive, not a saga. I need you. Hakon held her gaze, her fear raw, his own rising. And if we starve? If the raid fails because I stayed? What then? She pulled back, her eyes wet but hard. Then we fight together. Don't make me fight alone. Hakon stared into the fire, the flames flickering, the sea's call louder than ever. 7 days remained, and the choice was a blade, poised to fall. The wind swept through Skjoldvik, sharp and restless, carrying the scent of pine and the sea's salt tang. The fjord shimmered under a sky streaked with clouds, its waters restless as if sensing the village's fevered pulse. 3 days remained until Jarl Kettle Redbeard's ships would sail for the Frankish lands, and Skjoldvik thrummed with final preparations, axes sharpened, sails stitched, provisions packed in barrels. The air was thick with anticipation, but also fear, a shadow that clung to every hearth like damp rot. Hakon Olafsson felt it keenly, the weight of his unmade choice a stone in his chest, heavier with each passing hour. He stood on the shore, his hands busy with wave-cutter's rigging, though his eyes kept drifting to Serpent's Fawn, Kettle's warship, its prow gleaming with fresh paint. The village was a hive of activity, men tested oars, women hauled dried fish to the docks, children darted through the chaos, their laughter sharp against the wind. Hakon's hands moved by rote, tightening ropes, but his mind was elsewhere, on Freya's fierce words, Gunnar's taunts, the Volva's runes, and the children's faces, bright with trust he wasn't sure he deserved. Hakon. Einar's voice broke through, steady but urgent. The scarred warrior stood by Serpent's Fawn, a shield in hand. Kettle wants you at the hall tonight. Final plans. He's expecting your answer. Hakon nodded, his jaw tight. I'll be there. Einar studied him, his eyes knowing. Don't wait too long, friend. The sea doesn't care for indecision. Hakon turned back to his boat, the rope rough against his palms. Einar's words were true, but they didn't ease the knot in his gut. To sail was to risk everything, his life, his family's stability, the chance to see Bjorn grow or hear Liv's laughter again. To stay was to face hunger, shame, and Gunnar's scorn, a weight that would mark his children as much as him. He thought of Olaf, his father, whose shield hung empty in the Longhouse, and Tor, whose shell still sat on Liv's pallet. The sea had taken them, and Hakon wondered if it was greedy for more. He finished the rigging and made his way to the Longhouse, the wind tugging at his cloak. Inside, Freya was at the loom, her fingers quick, the clack of the shuttle a steady pulse. Bjorn sat by the hearth, carving a wooden fish, his knife careful but unsteady, while Liv played with her doll, humming a tune. The air was warm, the smell of stew and smoke grounding, but Freya's silence was heavy, her eyes fixed on the wool. "You're back early," she said, not looking up. "Boat ready?" "Aye," Hakon replied, hanging his cloak by the fire. "Einar says Kettle wants me at the hall tonight. To give my answer." Freya's hands paused, the shuttle still. "And have you won?" Hakon sat, Liv climbing onto his knee. "I'm trying, Freya. 3 days left. I can't see the path." She met his eyes, her gaze sharp but tired. "The path is us, Hakon. Bjorn, Liv, me. Not Kettle Silver, not Gunnar's taunts." Hakon's chest tightened, Liv's small hand warm in his. "And if the path leads to hunger? If the raid fails because we're short a man? The village won't forget." Freya set the shuttle down, her voice low. "The village isn't your blood. We are. Bjorn looked up, his knife still. Are you going, father? Sven says you have to. That it's what grandfather would have done. Hakon's throat caught, Bjorn's grey eyes too much like his own. Sven's got a big mouth, he said, forcing a smile. I'm thinking of you, not him. Liv tugged his beard, her voice bright. Will you bring a shell, like you promised? Hakon kissed her forehead, the ache in his chest spreading. If I go, little one, I'll find the best shell in Frankland. Freya's eyes darkened, and she stood, her movements brisk. Bjorn, take Liv to fetch water. Stay near the stream. Bjorn nodded, taking Liv's hand, and Hakon watched them go, the longhouse suddenly too quiet. Freya turned to him, her arms crossed. You're letting them pull you, Hakon. Kettle, Gunnar, the village. They're not your heart. He stood, his hands empty. My heart's here, Freya. But my hands feed us. If I don't go, and winter comes lean, what then? Bjorn's carving fish because we've no meat. Liv's doll is rags because we've no coin for cloth. Freya's voice cracked, rare and raw. And if you die? What do I tell them? That their father chose silver over them? Hakon stepped closer, his hands reaching for hers, but she pulled back. I haven't chosen, he said. I'm trying to keep us whole. She looked away, her eyes wet. Then try harder. The words hung between them, sharp as the wind outside. Hakon wanted to answer, to bridge the gap, but the hall meeting loomed, and he knew his time was running out. The day passed in a blur of work. Hakon joined the men packing barrels with dried fish and cheese, the provisions meager but vital. The shore was chaotic, voices shouting over the clatter of wood and iron. Serpent's Fong was nearly ready, its deck piled with shields, its oars tested. Hakon saw Gunnar among the men, his laughter loud, his eyes flicking to Hakon with a challenge unspoken. The rivalry had hardened since their sparring match, Gunnar's taunts now a public blade, cutting at Hakon's resolve. At midday, Freya gathered with the women at the edge of the village, where a slog, the Valva, led a ritual to bless the ships. The women stood in a circle, their hands linked, as a slog burned herbs, their smoke curling into the sky. She chanted, her voice low, calling on Fjord for calm seas, Freya for courage, Odin for wisdom. Freya stood tall, her face set, but Hakon saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the others. She was no believer in runes, but she was Skjoldvik's strength, and the women looked to her as much as to a slog. Hakon watched from a distance, Bjorn at his side. Why do they pray, father? The boy asked, his eyes on the smoke. To ask the gods for favor, Hakon said. For the ships, for the men. Bjorn frowned, his voice low. Do the gods listen? Hakon's hand rested on his son's shoulder. Sometimes. But we make our own luck, too. Bjorn nodded, his face serious, and Hakon felt the weight of his son's trust, heavier than any shield. He sent Bjorn to help the women, needing a moment alone. The fjord stretched before him, its surface calm but deep, hiding currents that could pull a man under. He thought of Olaf, standing on this shore, making the same choice years ago. Had he felt this fear, this pull between hearth and sea? As evening fell, the great hall glowed with torchlight, its walls echoing with voices. Hakon entered, the air thick with mead and tension. Kettle sat at the head, his red beard braided with silver, his eyes sharp. The men crowded the benches, their faces a mix of eagerness and doubt. Freya was there, standing with the women, her presence steady but distant. Hakon took a seat near Einar, his hands clasped, the weight of the moment pressing down. Ketil raised a horn, his voice booming. 3 days, men of Skjoldvik. 3 days, and we sail for Frankland, for silver and grain to fill our hearths. The gods have spoken, the ships are ready. Who stands with me? The hall roared, but Hakon's voice was silent, his eyes on Freya. Gunnar stood, his grin sharp. I'm with you, Jarl. And I'll bring back enough silver to shame the cowards who stay. Laughter rippled, and Hakon felt eyes on him, Gunnar's taunt a blade aimed true. He stood, his voice steady but low. I'll give my answer tomorrow, Ketil. My family comes first, but Skjoldvik's my blood, too. Ketil's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. Tomorrow, then, son of Olaf. Don't keep the sea waiting. The meeting turned to plans. Routes, tides, the Franks' defenses. Hakon listened, his mind half elsewhere, Freya's words echoing, choose for us. As the hall emptied, Gunnar brushed past, his shoulder hard against Hakon's. Decide quick, fisherman, he muttered. Or the village will decide for you. Hakon's fists clenched, but he let Gunnar go, the night swallowing his rival's steps. Freya joined him, her cloak drawn tight, and they walked home in silence, the stars sharp above. The Longhouse was quiet, the children asleep, the fire a low glow. Hakon sat, Freya beside him, the weight of tomorrow heavy. I stood up in the hall, he said, his voice low. Said I'd answer tomorrow. Freya's hand found his, her fingers cold but firm. And will you? Hakon looked into the fire, the flames offering no path. I want to stay, Freya. But Gunnar's right, the village needs men. If I don't go, and the raid fails, they'll blame us. Bjorn will carry that shame. Freya's grip tightened. Bjorn will carry worse if you don't come back. I can't weave enough to feed us alone, Hakon. I can't fight the winter without you. He turned to her, her eyes fierce and wet. I'm not Olaf, he said. I'm not chasing glory. But I'm scared, Freya. Scared of failing you, of failing them. She leaned into him, her forehead against his, her voice a whisper. Then choose us. Whatever it costs. Hakon held her, the fire's warmth fading, the sea's call relentless. 3 days remained, and the blade of choice was falling. The dawn broke over Skjoldvik with a sky like bruised iron, heavy clouds rolling in from the sea, their edges tinged with a faint, ominous red. The fjord lay restless, its waters slapping against the rocky shore, stirred by a wind that carried the scent of salt and impending storm. The village was a flurry of motion, every soul caught in the final preparations for Jarl Ketil Redbeard's raid, set to sail at first light tomorrow. The air was thick with the smells of pine tar, smoked fish, and damp wool, and the sounds of hammers, shouts, and the creak of ship timbers echoed through the mist. Hakon Olafsson stood at the edge of the shore, his hands gripping the prow of Wave Cutter, his father's boat, as if it could anchor him against the tide of his thoughts. One day remained. One day to give Ketil his answer, to choose between the sea's promise of silver and the hearth's fragile warmth. The weight of it had kept Hakon awake through the night, his mind churning like the fjord's currents. Freya's words, choose us, rang in his ears, clashing with Gunnar's taunts, Ketil's expectations, and the village's unspoken judgment. He thought of Bjorn's grey eyes, Liv's laughter, and the empty spaces left by Olaf and Tor. The sea was a hungry god, and Hakon feared its appetite, but hunger on land was no less cruel. He checked Wavecutter's hull, his hands tracing the patched timbers, though he knew every inch was sound. The work was a distraction, a way to delay the choice that loomed like the clouds above. Serpent's Fawn, Kettle's warship, dominated the dock, its crew loading barrels of water and dried fish, their voices sharp with purpose. Einar, Kettle's right-hand man, oversaw the work, his scarred face focused, while Sven, the young raider, hauled ropes with a grin that hadn't faded despite the grim mood. Hakon envied Sven's certainty, his unscarred faith in glory. Hakon, a voice called, sharp and mocking. Gunnar emerged from the mist, his black beard braided, his axe slung across his back. Still petting that old boat? The sea's waiting, fisherman, and Kettle's tired of your dithering. Hakon straightened, his hands falling to his sides. My boat's ready, Gunnar. My answer's for Kettle, not you. Gunnar's grin was a blade, his eyes glinting. Kettle, me, the village, it's all the same. You're Olaf's son, but you've no fire. Stay home, Hakon. Let real men bring the silver. The words cut deep, and Hakon's fists clenched, the memory of their sparring match fresh. Real men don't need to bark to prove it, he said, his voice low. Save your breath for the Franks. Gunnar laughed, a harsh sound that drew eyes, but before he could reply, Einar's shout cut through. Gunnar, move those barrels. We're not sailing on your tongue. Gunnar smirked and turned away, but his gaze lingered, a promise of trouble unspent. Hakon returned to Wavecutter, his pulse heavy. Gunnar's taunts were a mirror, reflecting the village's doubt, the fear that he was less than his father. He thought of Olaf, standing tall in the hall, his voice binding Skjoldvik through lean years. Hakon was no jarl, only a man, but the village saw Olaf's shadow, and it was a weight he couldn't shake. By mid-morning, the wind had strengthened, rattling the sails. Hakon joined the men testing Serpent's Fawn's oars, their rhythm steady despite the choppy fjord. The ship was a beast, its timbers groaning, its prow carved with a serpent's snarl. Hakon rowed beside Einar, their strokes matched, the work grounding him. Einar glanced over, his voice low. Kettle's expecting you at the hall tonight. Last chance, Hakon. What's it to be? Hakon's breath was heavy, the oar slick in his hands. I'll answer tonight. I owe him that. Einar nodded, his scar twisting. You owe your family more. I've no wife, no children. You do. Choose wise. Hakon didn't reply, the fjord spray cold on his face. Einar's words were a lifeline, but the sea's pull was strong, its promise of silver a lure for Bjorn's hunger, Liv's rags, Freya's weary hands. Back at the Longhouse, Freya was at the hearth, kneading dough for flatbread, her movements brisk but strained. Bjorn sat by the fire, sharpening a fishing spear, his face set, while Liv played with her shell, the one Tor had brought, her hum soft but piercing. The air was warm, the smell of bread and smoke a fragile comfort, but Freya's silence was a wall, her eyes avoiding Hakon's. You're soaked, she said, not looking up. Dry your cloak. Hakon hung his cloak by the fire, the wool steaming. The ships are nearly ready. Kettle wants my answer tonight. Freya's hands stilled, the dough forgotten. And you've made it? Hakon sat, Liv climbing onto his knee. I'm close, Freya. But it's not simple. Gunnar's at me, the village watches, and the stores. Stop, she cut in, her voice low but fierce. Don't hide behind the village. You're choosing for us, or you're not. Hakon's chest tightened, Liv's weight warm against him. I'm choosing for us. But us means food, warmth, a roof. If I stay, and winter's cruel, what then? Freya's eyes met his, raw and unyielding. Then we face it. I'd rather starve with you than bury you. Bjorn's spear clattered to the floor, his voice sharp. Are you going, father? Everyone says you have to. That we need you. Hakon turned to his son, Bjorn's gray eyes fierce with a child's fear. Everyone doesn't sleep here, Bjorn. I'm thinking of you, of Liv, of your mother. Liv's voice piped up, small but clear. Don't go, father. Stay and tell stories. Hakon's throat closed, and he hugged her tight, her shell pressing into his chest. Freya stood, her hands flour-dusted, and moved to the loom, her back to him. The silence was heavier than the storm clouds outside. The day passed in fevered work. Hakon helped load Serpent's Fong with provisions, the barrels light but precious. Freya joined the women packing herbs and bandages, her hands steady, her face a mask. The village was a single heartbeat, every task tied to tomorrow's dawn. Aslog, the Volva, walked the shore, scattering runes and chanting, her staff tapping the pebbles. Hakon saw Freya watching her, her expression unreadable, and wondered if she sought answers where he found none. At dusk, a crisis broke the rhythm. A barrel of water, mishandled by Sven, split on the dock, its contents soaking the boards. Ketil's roar echoed, his red beard bristling, and Sven shrank under his glare. Hakon stepped forward, his voice calm. There's time to refill it, Jarl. I'll take Sven to the stream. Ketil's eyes softened, but his voice was hard. See it done, Hakon. We sail tomorrow, with or without you. Hakon led Sven to the stream, the boy's face red with shame. I didn't mean it, Sven muttered, filling a new barrel. I just wanted to help. Hakon clapped his shoulder, the water cold on his hands. You will. Keep your eyes open, Sven. The sea's no place for mistakes. Sven nodded, his grin returning, and Hakon felt a pang for the boy's youth, so like his own once was. They returned to the dock, the barrel heavy, and Hakon saw Gunnar watching, his smirk a silent jab. The rivalry was a fire, banked but burning, and Hakon knew it would flare before the raid was done. As night fell, the great hall glowed, its walls alive with shadows. Hakon entered, the air thick with mead, smoke, and tension. Ketil sat at the head, his bearskin cloak draped over his shoulders, his eyes scanning the crowd. Freya stood with the women, her face still, her presence a quiet strength. Hakon took a seat near Einar, his hands clasped, the moment he dreaded upon him. Ketil raised a horn, his voice a thunderclap. Tomorrow, Skjoldvik sails for Frankland. The gods have blessed us, the ships are ready. Who stands with me? The hall roared, horns clashing, but Hakon's heart pounded, his answer unformed. Gunnar stood, his voice loud. I sail, Jarl. And I'll bring silver to make Skjoldvik proud, unlike some. The laughter was sharp, and Hakon felt Freya's eyes, steady and fierce. He stood, the hall falling silent, every gaze on him. Jarl Ketil, he began, his voice steady but heavy, I've thought long. My family is my heart, but Skjoldvik is my blood. I'll sail with you, to bring back what we need. The hall erupted, cheers and fists pounding, but Freya's face was stone, her eyes wet. Ketil grinned, raising his horn. Olaf's son. To Hakon, and to victory. Hakon sat, his pulse racing, Freya's gaze a weight he couldn't bear. Gunnar's smirk was gone, replaced by a grudging nod, but Hakon felt no triumph, only the sea's cold embrace closing around him. After the hall, Freya walked ahead, her steps quick, the night swallowing her cloak. Hakon followed, the longhouse dark save for the fire's glow. The children slept, their breaths soft, and Hakon sat by the hearth, Freya standing, her arms crossed. "You chose," she said, her voice low, raw. "The sea." Hakon's hands clasped, empty. "I chose us, Freya. Silver for Bjorn's hunger, cloth for Liv's rags. I'll come back." Her eyes flashed, tears falling. "You can't promise that." Olaf didn't. Tor didn't. He stood, reaching for her, and she let him hold her, her body trembling. "I'm not them," he whispered. "I'll fight to come home." Freya pulled back, her voice fierce. "You'd better, Hakon. Or I'll curse you to the gods myself." They sat together, the fire fading, the sea's roar louder than ever. One day remained, and Hakon's choice was made, but its cost was just beginning. The sea stretched endless before Skjoldvik, a vast, churning gray under a sky heavy with clouds. The wind howled, cold and fierce, whipping the fjord into froth that slapped against the hulls of the ships moored at the dock. Dawn had barely broken, its light a thin, pale line on the horizon, but the village was alive with movement, every soul gathered to see Jarl Kettle Redbeard's raid depart for the Frankish lands. Serpent's Fang, the warship, stood proud, its prow carved with a snarling beast, its sails furled against the gale. Beside it, two smaller boats, including Hakon Olafsson's wave cutter, rocked in the swell, their timbers creaking under the strain. Hakon stood on the shore, his cloak sodden, his hands gripping a shield and axe, their weight familiar but heavy. The air was thick with salt, tar, and the murmurs of the crowd. Men shouting farewells, women clutching children, the Volva Aslog chanting blessings over the wind. Hakon's heart pounded, his decision to sail a blade lodged in his chest. He'd chosen the sea, the promise of silver for his family, but the cost was etched in Freya's face, pale and fierce, standing with Bjorn and Liv among the villagers. Her eyes met his, raw with fear and defiance, and Hakon felt the distance between them, wider than the sea he was about to cross. The night before had been a storm of its own. They'd sat by the longhouse fire, the children asleep, Freya's hands trembling in his. "Come back," she'd whispered, her voice breaking. "Or I'll haunt you to hell." He'd held her, promising with words he prayed he could keep, but sleep had eluded them, the sea's roar a constant reminder of dawn. Now, as he faced her, words failed. He knelt, pulling Bjorn and Liv close, their small bodies warm against the wind. "Be strong," he told Bjorn, his son's gray eyes wide but steady. "Help your mother. Keep Liv safe." Bjorn nodded, his jaw tight, too young for such burdens. "I will, father. Bring back silver." Hakon forced a smile, ruffling Liv's hair. "And a shell for you, little one," he said, her giggle piercing his heart. He stood, meeting Freya's gaze. She stepped forward, pressing a small rune-carved stone into his hand, her fingers cold. "For luck," she said, her voice low. "Don't make me bury it." He closed his hand around the stone, nodding, and turned to the ships, the weight of her words heavier than his shield. Kettle's voice boomed over the crowd, his red beard braided, his bearskin cloak flapping. "To the ships, men of Skjoldvik. The sea calls, and Franklin waits. The crew surged forward, their boots crunching on pebbles, their faces a mix of eagerness and dread. Hakon boarded Serpent's Fong, his place among the oarsmen, Wavecutter left moored for his return, if the gods allowed. Einar, Ketil's right-hand man, clapped his shoulder, his scarred face grim but warm. "Keep your head, Hakon. We'll need it." Hakon nodded, taking his oar, the wood worn smooth. Gunnar was nearby, his black beard glinting, his grin sharp as he settled at his bench. "Decided to be a man, fisherman," he taunted, his voice low. "Don't drown before we reach Frankland." Hakon's grip tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes on the fjord. The rivalry was a live coal, burning beneath the raid's urgency, and he knew Gunnar would fan it given chance. Sven, the young raider, sat across, his grin undimmed, his oar unsteady but eager. The crew numbered 30, a mix of veterans like Einar and green boys like Sven, their fates bound by the sea. Ketil raised his axe, the signal given, and the ships cast off, the rope splashing into the water. The crowd's cheers faded as the oars dipped, the rhythm slow but strong, pulling Serpent's Fong from the fjord's embrace. Hakon rowed, his shoulders straining, his eyes fixed on Freya until she was a speck, then gone, swallowed by the mist. The sea opened before them, vast and unforgiving, and Hakon felt its hunger, a cold hand at his neck. The first day was grueling, the wind against them, the oars a relentless task. The sea was choppy, spray soaking the crew, their cloaks heavy. Ketil stood at the helm, his voice steady, calling the stroke. Hakon rowed, his body settling into the work, but his mind was in Skjoldvik, Freya at the loom, Bjorn's spear, Liv's shell. He clutched the runestone in his pocket, its edges sharp, a tether to home. By night, they anchored in a sheltered cove, the ships rocking gently. The crew ate dried fish and bread, their faces lit by a small fire on shore. Ketil spoke of Franklin's riches, his eyes gleaming, but Hakon saw the tension in Einar's jaw, the doubt in older men's eyes. Gunnar's laughter was loud, his tales of past raids bold, but Hakon stayed silent, his thoughts on the sea's vastness, its indifference. Sleep was fitful, the wind howling, the ship's timbers creaking. Hakon dreamed of Freya, her face fading into waves, and woke to a gray dawn, the sea calmer but no less daunting. The second day brought rain, a cold drizzle that seeped through cloaks, the oars slick in their hands. The crew grumbled, their rhythm faltering, and Ketil's voice grew sharp, urging them on. Hakon rowed beside Einar, their strokes matched, the work a refuge from thought. Midday brought trouble. Sven, eager but clumsy, caught his oar on a wave, snapping it clean. The crew cursed, the ship lurching, and Gunnar's voice rang out. "Boy's a curse. We'll sink with him aboard." Hakon steadied Sven, his voice low. "Easy, lad. We'll fix it." He helped rig a spare oar, ignoring Gunnar's glare, but the incident set a sour mood, the crew's nerves frayed by the sea's relentless test. That night, anchored off a rocky isle, the tension broke. Gunnar, mead in hand, taunted Hakon openly, his voice carrying over the fire. "Olaf's son, rowing like a thrall. Your father would have led us, not coddled boys." Hakon stood, his axe at his belt, his voice cold. "My father's dead, Gunnar. His shield's empty. I'm here for Skjoldvik, not your mouth." The crew fell silent, eyes flicking between them. Ketil watched, his face unreadable, but Einar stepped between, his hand on Hakon's arm. "Save it for the Franks," he said, his tone final. Gunnar smirked, but backed down, the moment diffused but not forgotten. Back in Skjoldvik, Freya woke to an empty longhouse, the fire low, the silence deafening. Bjorn and Liv slept, their faces peaceful, but Freya's heart was a storm, Hakon's absence a wound. She rose, stoking the fire, her hands moving by rote. The village felt hollow, the men's departure a void filled by women's work and worry. She stepped outside, the air cold, the fjord dark, and saw other women, Thrain's wife, Aslog, the Volva, moving through the mist, their faces mirrors of her own. Freya spent the day at the loom, her fingers weaving wool, but her thoughts were with Hakon, imagining waves, spears, blood. Bjorn fetched water, his silence heavy, while Liv clung to her, sensing the change. The women gathered at midday, sharing bread and fears, their voices low. Aslog spoke of omens, her runes promising victory, but Freya's trust was in Hakon, not the gods. A crisis came at dusk. Thrain, the old fisherman, fell ill, his cough wet and deep, his face gray. Freya joined the women tending him, her hands steady with herbs and cloths, but his fever burned hot, a reminder of last winter's losses. The village rallied, but fear spread, whispers of bad omens, of the raid's cost. Freya worked late, her exhaustion a dull ache, and returned to the longhouse, Bjorn and Liv asleep, the fire a faint glow. She sat, clutching Hakon's cloak, its scent of salt and wood a fragile link. "Come back," she whispered, her voice breaking, the fjords roar her only answer. At sea, the third day dawned with a storm, the sky black, the sea a roiling beast. Serpents Fong pitched, waves crashing over the deck, the crew bailing water, their shouts lost in the gale. Hakon tied himself to the bench, his oar useless, his hands gripping the runestone. Kettle roared orders, his beard sodden, while Einar steadied the helm, his face grim. Sven vomited, his bravado gone, and even Gunnar was silent, his eyes on the waves. The storm raged for hours, the ship a leaf in the sea's grasp. Hakon thought of Freya, of Bjorn's trust, Liv's shell, and prayed to Thor, to Njord, to any god listening. As dusk fell, the wind eased, the sea calming, the crew exhausted but alive. Kettle laughed, his voice raw. "The gods test us, but we're stronger." Hakon's hands shook, the runestone warm in his palm. The sea had spared them, but Frankland waited, its shores no kinder. He looked at Gunnar, their eyes meeting, the rivalry a shadow against the raid's perils. One day at sea remained, and Hakon knew the true test was coming, for him, for Skjoldvik, for the hearth he'd left behind. The Frankish coast loomed through the dawn mist, a dark line of cliffs and dunes jagged against a sky pale as bone. The sea was calm, its surface glassy after days of storm and struggle, but the air held a taut stillness, heavy with the promise of blood. Serpent's Fong, Jarl Kettle Redbeard's warship, glided silently, its oars dipping in rhythm, flanked by the two smaller boats. Hakon Olafsson gripped his oar, his hands raw, his shield and axe at his feet, their weight a constant reminder of what lay ahead. The crew was silent, 30 men bound by purpose but shadowed by fear, their faces etched with salt and exhaustion. Hakon's heart pounded, not for glory but for home, Freya's fierce eyes, Bjorn's trust, Liv's laughter, the runestone in his pocket a tether to Skjoldvik. For days at sea had tested them. The storm had nearly broken Serpent's Fong, its timbers scarred, its crew battered but alive. Kettle's voice had held them together, his red beard a beacon, but Hakon saw the strain in his eyes, the weight of leading men to uncertain fates. Einar, steady as stone, had kept the helm, while Sven, the young raider, had shed his bravado, his hands trembling on his oar. Gunnar, Hakon's rival, sat nearby, his black beard braided, his grin gone but his eyes sharp, watching Hakon like a wolf. Their rivalry had simmered through the journey, Gunnar's taunts a constant prod, but the sea's dangers had kept it from flaring, until now, with Franklin's shore in sight. Ketil stood at the prow, his bearskin cloak dark against the mist, his voice low but carrying Franklin's riches wait, men of Skjoldvik. A monastery lies beyond those dunes, its altars heavy with silver. We strike fast, take what we need, and sail before their spears wake. For our hearths, for our blood. The crew murmured assent, their oars steady, but Hakon's grip tightened, his thoughts on Freya's warning, don't make me bury it. He'd chosen the sea for silver, for Bjorn's hunger, Liv's rags, but the cost was clear in the faces around him. Men who might not see Skjoldvik again. He glanced at Einar, whose scar twisted with resolve, and Sven, whose youth seemed fragile against the looming shore. Gunnar caught his eye, his lip curling, and Hakon looked away, the runestone warm in his hand. The ships beached silently, their hulls grinding on sand, the crew leaping into the shallows, their boots splashing. Hakon shouldered his shield, its rim painted blue, and gripped his axe, its haft worn smooth. The dunes rose before them, tufted with grass, hiding the monastery Ketil's scouts had marked, a stone-walled haven of Christian wealth, lightly guarded but not defenseless. The crew formed up, Ketil leading, his axe gleaming, Einar at his side. Hakon fell in beside Sven, his voice low. Stay close, lad. Shield up, eyes open. Sven nodded, his spear shaking, and Hakon felt a pang, seeing Bjorn in the boy's fear. Gunnar pushed past, his shield broad, his voice a mutter. Keep the boy, fisherman. I'll take the silver. Hakon ignored him, his focus on the dunes. The crew moved swiftly, their steps muffled by sand, the mist cloaking them. They crested the rise, and the monastery came into view, a squat stone building, its roof thatched, a wooden cross atop its gate. Smoke curled from a chimney, and a bell tolled faintly, its sound swallowed by the wind. 2 Frankish guards stood at the gate, their spears lax, unaware of the shadows closing in. Ketil signaled, and the crew charged, a silent wave breaking into a roar. Hakon ran, his shield raised, his axe ready, the sand shifting under his boots. The guards shouted, their spears leveling, but Einar's axe took one, and Ketil's the other, their blood dark on the ground. The gate splintered under blows, and the crew poured in, their voices a storm of Norse fury. Hakon followed, his heart racing, the monastery's walls closing around him. Inside was chaos, monks in brown robes fleeing, their cries sharp, a bell clanging wildly. The hall was dim, lit by candles, its altar gleaming with silver crosses and cups. Ketil's men spread out, grabbing loot, smashing benches, their greed afire. Hakon moved with Sven, his axe unused, his eyes scanning for threats. A monk lunged from a shadow, a knife flashing, and Hakon's shield blocked it, his axe striking the man's arm, blood spraying. The monk fell, moaning, and Hakon froze, his breath ragged, the man's pain too human. Move, fisherman. Gunnar's voice snapped, his shield heavy with plunder. Hakon pushed Sven forward, grabbing a silver cup, its weight cold, and stuffed it into his sack. The crew was frenzied, but Ketil's shout cut through. Spears! To the gate! Hakon turned, seeing Frankish warriors, 10, maybe 12, rushing from a nearby village, their chainmail glinting, their spears leveled. The raid had woken them, and now the price was due. Kettle formed a shield wall at the gate, his voice a roar. "Hold, men! We take what's ours." Hakon joined the line, his shield locked with Einar's, Sven trembling beside him. Gunnar was to his right, his axe bloodied, his grin wild. The Franks charged, their spears thrusting, and the shield wall shuddered, wood cracking, men grunting. Hakon's axe swung, catching a spear shaft, his shield taking a blow that numbed his arm. Einar's axe felled a Frank, blood pooling, but Sven screamed, a spear grazing his shoulder, red blooming on his tunic. "Hold him!" Hakon shouted, pulling Sven back, his own axe striking a Frank's helm, the man staggering. The shield wall held, but barely, the Franks pressing, their shouts in a tongue Hakon didn't know. Kettle's voice rallied them, his axe a blur, but Hakon saw the cost, 2 of their men down, their shields splintered. Gunnar broke ranks, charging a Frank, his axe cleaving the man's shoulder, but the move left a gap. A Frankish spear thrust through, aiming for Hakon, and he twisted, the point scraping his side, pain flaring. He roared, his axe swinging, felling the Frank, but Gunnar's laugh grated. "Weak, fisherman! I saved you!" Hakon's blood boiled, but the fight left no room for reply. The shield wall tightened, Kettle's voice a drum, and the Franks faltered, their numbers thinning. With a final push, the crew broke them, the surviving Franks fleeing, their shouts fading. The monastery was theirs, but the victory was bitter, 3 men dead, Sven wounded, Hakon's side bleeding under his tunic. Kettle ordered a retreat, the crew grabbing what loot remained, silver, grain sacks, a few furs. Hakon carried Sven, the boy's weight heavy, his wound shallow but painful. They reached the ships, the mist lifting, the sea calm but cold. Serpent's Fong was loaded, its deck slick with blood and seawater, and the crew pushed off, their oars dipping, the Frankish shore fading behind. Hakon bandaged Sven's shoulder, his own side throbbing, the runestone a steady weight in his pocket. Kettle stood at the helm, his face grim, his loot secure but his crew diminished. Einar rode beside Hakon, his voice low. "You fought well, Hakon. Olaf would be proud." Hakon shook his head, his hands on the oar. "I fought for home, not pride." Gunnar's voice cut through, sharp and mocking. "Home? You nearly died, fisherman. Stick to nets, not axes." Hakon's grip tightened, his side aching, but Kettle's shout silenced them. "Enough! We sail for Skjoldvik. Save your fire for the sea." The journey back was grim, the sea kind but the crew weary, their losses a shadow. Hakon rode, his body screaming, his sack heavy with silver and a small, pearled shell for live. He thought of Freya, her runestone, her curse, and prayed he'd see her again. Gunnar's eyes followed him, the rivalry unspent, but the sea's vastness dulled its edge. In Skjoldvik, Freya faced her own battles. The village was a fragile web, its men gone, its stores lean. Thrain's fever had spread, 3 more falling ill, their coughs wet and deep. Freya led the women, her hands steady with herbs, her voice calm but firm. She wove by night, her loom a refuge, Bjorn and Liv sleeping close, their fears a weight she carried alone. The Volva Aslog spoke of omens, but Freya's faith was in work, in the fire she kept burning, in the hope of Hakon's return. A storm hit the village, its winds tearing at roofs, its rains flooding paths. Freya rallied the women, repairing damage, sharing food, her leadership quiet but unyielding. Bjorn helped, his small hands hauling timber, his face set, while Liv clung to her shell, her questions, "Where's father? a knife in Freya's heart. At night, Freya clutched Hakon's cloak, her prayers wordless, the fjords roar her only answer. On the 5th day at sea, Serpent's Fang sighted Skjoldvik, its cliffs rising through the mist, the fjord a welcome embrace. The crew cheered, their voices raw, but Hakon's relief was tempered by fear. What had he left behind? The ships beached, the village rushing to meet them, their faces a mix of joy and dread. Freya stood at the shore, Bjorn and Liv beside her, her eyes searching the crew. Hakon leapt into the shallows, his sack heavy, his side bandaged, and saw her, pale, fierce, alive. He ran, dropping his shield, and she met him, her arms tight, her breath a sob. "You came back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I promised," he said, holding her, Bjorn and Liv clinging to him, their laughter a balm. He gave Liv the shell, its pearl gleaming, and Bjorn the silver cup, its weight a promise kept. The village cheered, but Hakon saw the gaps, 3 men lost, their families weeping, Sven's wound a reminder of the cost. Ketil strode ashore, his loot piled high, his voice booming. "Skjoldvik feasts tonight. Silver and grain for all." The crowd roared, but Freya's eyes stayed on Hakon, her hand on his side, feeling the bandage. "You're hurt," she said, her voice low. "It's nothing," he lied, her touch grounding him. Gunnar passed, his sack heavy, his nod grudging. "Not bad, fisherman," he said, his voice lacking venom, the rivalry dulled by shared blood. The great hall glowed that night, its tables laden with fish, bread, and mead, the silver gleaming. Ketil toasted the raid, his laughter loud, but Hakon sat with Freya, Bjorn, and Liv, the fire warm, the village whole. Freya leaned into him, her voice soft. "You chose us," she said, her hand on the runestone he returned. "I did," he said, his side aching, his heart full. The sea had spared him, but its shadow remained, a reminder of what he'd risked, what he'd gained. Winter came, lean but bearable, the silver buying grain, the village enduring. Hakon fished, his hands steady, Freya wove, her loom singing, and Bjorn and Liv grew, their laughter Skjoldvik's heart. Gunnar's taunts faded, his own wounds a mirror, and Ketil's gaze softened, seeing Olaf in Hakon's quiet strength. The fjord rolled on, its voice eternal, and Hakon stood on its shore, the runestone in his pocket, knowing he was home. For more interesting and heart-touching videos, please visit our YouTube channel and like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.